So let's get started. And as Don said, I would love for this to be interactive. I've got Windows, I've got a large monitor, which is helpful, and Windows open for the chat and the Q&A. So please drop what you want to in either of those places or whatever you need to do. I'll happily answer whatever. I should have time at the end too for Q&A, but I'll even take them in the middle of my talk. I've done this enough that you hopefully won't knock me knock me off my game. So let's talk about taking DevSecOps to 11 with DefectDojo. And so who am I? I am Matt Sorrow. I am the co-founder or CTO and co-founder of DefectDojo Inc. I like to call myself a reformed programmer. My first job out of college was writing web apps. So I've been doing this application thing for a while. And I really kind of diverted from being a developer to really being an AppSec engineer, where I got caught the security bug and sort of never looked back. I've been with OWASP and busy in the community since 2008, so that's like 15 plus years. I'm one of the core maintainers of DefectDojo. I'm a co-lead of the AppSec pipeline project, and I was the leader of the OSWT project. And just so you know my biases, I'm 23 plus years of using free, Libre, and open source software in Linux. Windows 2000 was the last version of Windows I used for realsies. So I'm a Linux person talking to you on a Linux box today. So go Linux. I'm also a Golang fanboy. That's what I've been writing things in of late. It's my favorite language. And believe it or not, that's me actually breaking 2 boards at once with a jump double front kick to get my 2nd degree black belt in Tongsudo Migu Kwan. And somehow I managed to land on my feet, which was probably the biggest and most exciting part of that event. So who is this guy? Anybody have any guesses? I'll wait, enough time for you to madly open the chat window. But anybody have an idea who this person is? This nice black and white photo of this gentleman in his suit. It looks like a bow tie. Going once, going twice. So this gentleman here is actually Henry Ford, and he did introduced some radical changes to the automotive industry, right? Took it from being where if you had the means to buy a car back when cars were rare things, and you wanted to get a car built, you'd actually buy the car and then take it to a coach builder, and they would custom build the body for you. Everything was a one-off. And Henry Ford came in and said, this is kind of crazy. I think I can make a lot more cars if I make them in an assembly line. And you can have a Model T in whatever color you want, as long as that color is black, right? And there really weren't a lot of options, but he could crank these things out very quickly. And I think we need to do the same thing for AppSec, product security, whatever you want to call it, because there's too many apps out there for us to do these. Although as much as I've done pen testing, as much as I love manually pen testing things, there's only so much bandwidth any human being or collection of human beings has, and we need to expand our reach. And so the way we're going to do that is to do the DevSecOps thing and turn AppSec and the activities around product security or DevSecOps or whatever you want to call it into much more of a factory automated process. And just a quick survey, right? Raise your hands or drop something in chat. Right? Are you an AppSec person? Are you a product security? Are you a security engineer? Do you do the DevSecOps, ops, DevSec, SecOps, ops, dev? Right? What do you do? Hey, we got one hand raised. Perfect. Whatever you do, this talk is geared towards people that are sort of in the trenches, as well as their management, to be quite honest with you, trying to make the best out of what can be a very tricky situation. If you look at the numbers between AppSec and development, they're usually 100 to 1. I've had even worse ratios. I think the worst I had was like 2,500 plus developers to there was 6 of us, I think, which is a pretty awful ratio. So it feels like from our side, we're always going to be behind the 8 ball, whatever. Like we're going to be against large numbers. So how do we turn the tables and catch up? And if you're doing AppSec today, at least traditional AppSec, this might be what it feels like. I have no idea why this person drew in the manuscript jousting snails. I just find that to be awesome. So I don't know about you, but when I first started into the my AppSec career, everything felt so slow and painful. I remember one Gantt chart I saw from a uh, product manager that actually they kept pushing things and pushing things, of course, because you can't change the deadline, but you can push everything down. And they had security testing 0 days. And I thought, well, that's guaranteed to not do so well because we had 0 days to test security. So hopefully we can get you beyond the jousting snail situation. And then you can't. There's a law. I don't know if you realize this. There's a law in the United States, at least, that says you cannot have a slide that mentions DevSecOps without the infinity symbol. So I have that here. I've met my legal obligations to make sure that I have an infinity symbol in a talk that mentions DevSecOps. But in reality, let's say you do have DevSecOps. What is the outgrowth of that? If you truly have continual testing, and some people do, and some people are working towards it, but if you do have continual testing, what does that really mean for you? Well, what that generally means for a lot of people is piles and piles of vulnerabilities, right? And this is not a happy place to be, right? You have to make sense of all of these tools with all of these different formats telling you these different things are good or bad, and you need to make sense of it. You need to prioritize it. You want to get a handle on it to understand where to focus your limited efforts, right? Because I've never been on a security team that had too many people. I've only ever been on them that had too few. So it really comes down to an understanding of I've got this huge mountain to climb. How do I climb it with the few people I have? And so as you find yourself with these piles and piles of vulnerabilities, how do you keep track of them, right? Do we have sticky notes? You're doing emails? What are you doing? And so I got curious about this. I got super curious about this. And I went and I conducted a highly scientific poll across the enterprise. And what are 90%? What is the preferred tool of 90% of enterprise vulnerability management programs? Anybody have a guess? Well, you won't be surprised to know it's Excel. And God help us why. Like Excel, great thing if you want to do spreadsheety stuff, but it's not so great if you want to do real work, at least real work in terms of managing a complex uh, flow of vulnerabilities through a product security team. So why? Why are you doing this? There are much better options. It makes as much sense as me putting rubber rain boots on my poor dog. And that is Jerry, by the way. That's little Jerry when he was much younger. He's rather older and much more sleepy these days. But unfortunately, Jerry got to wear some rain boots at one point in time. So DefectDojo, the whole reason we're here. Call it DevSecOps if you want to be swank with the new terminology from Gartner, or call it an ASPM, call it vulnerability management, call it whatever you want to do. It's the one platform that was created by product security people for product security people addressing their real world needs. And I think that's one of the things that has made DefectDojo be very successful, because it was created many years ago back at Rackspace when I ran the product security team, and I had this problem and we needed to solve it. And together with a bunch of people who are now actually part of DefectDojo Inc., some of them are, that were coworkers of mine at Rackspace, we created DefectDojo and open sourced it. So typical vulnerability management, like I told you, you've got a cadre of tools. I've been doing this for quite some time now, and the number of tools that I have to run to cover my environment hasn't gotten anything but larger. Right? It used to be you run Nessus or some kind of infrastructure tool. You did a little bit of DAST. You called it good. Maybe you had SAST if you were lucky and had some budget. That's no longer the case. You've got container runtime, container image tools. You've got SAST, DAST, SCA. Some people are running licensing tools. There's all sorts of tools these days to wrap your head around, and all of them produce very different snowflakey results. And if you're trying to manage this with something like Excel, unfortunately, you're kind of headed for pain. So as I mentioned, as you have more and more tools, which inevitably, as you mature as a programmer, just because of technology changes, you have more and more different tools to understand the environment you're working in. Inevitably, that means more and more findings that are coming into your life that you have to triage and understand. And triaging those things, yeah, if you had a few set of tools, doing it manually was workable-ish, but it wasn't great. But if you do this at anything that resembles scale, a manual review process just doesn't cut it. And it's no, you don't have enough FTEs in your team to make this happen. So need to find a better way. And then honestly, I mean, I've tried to hire security people. It is very hard to hire good security people, or even just okay security people, any security people, because the field just doesn't have a lot of people in it that are, available to go hire. So you either have to train up people, if you can even get the FTE budget in place. So you have to make the most of the people you have. And I think what I'm going to show you today will help you do that. So DefectDojo, your single source of truth. I'm showing here the beta that we have of our UI. We also have the original UI as well. Right now, the new UI is in beta. And I counted the other day, Jay just had a PR to add the Nancy scanner. So thank you, Jay. And we're up to 177 different scanners that we support intaking or ingesting data from. So I think if nothing else, DefectDojo stands alone with an incredible support of a whole bunch of different tools that allow you to take in any number of inputs and then have one view of the world, which is really, really important. It's why we created Dojo, honestly, to begin with. So I want to quickly touch on the data model for those people who may not be familiar with DefectDojo. Hopefully you all are, but just in case you're not, I'm going to very quickly run through this. So the idea with DefectDojo, when you're dividing up your data, particularly the data that describes the security situation that you're in charge of, right? This might be a product security group. It could be an AppSec group. It could be a combined group. At Rackspace, I owned everything that ran our cloud. So that was infrastructure and app. So it just depends on the environment you're working in. But the idea here is with DefectDojo is you have a product type, and this is the base of the data model. So you have one or more product types to divide up your products into. Product types tend to be things like, it depends by customer. Usually there's things like divisions of a business. Like if you're a large financial one, maybe your insurance product line and your retail banking product line and your investing banking product line, or this could be, I've seen people use this geographically. So like North America versus Europe versus APAC. However you want to do that, product type is the original or the initial model that you'd use. And every product type has products. This is an application, any kind of unit that you want to report at. Generally, it's an application, could be something different than that. I've seen a couple people do different things where they have specific products for specific versions. This is usually for embedded type of applications or hardware that have embedded software. But then you have products, and then products have engagements. Engagements is a way to collect one or more tools output into a reporting unit, is how I like to think about it. So if you run one tool, you may only have a single test in that engagement, and that's fine. But if you run 3 tools and you want to report what the net result is of those 3 tools, you can report at the engagement level. And this is an important point about the data model. We have reporting at the product type level, well, the global level across all of Dojo, but also at the product type level, the product level, the engagement level. I can report on a single test. I guess you could report on a single finding. That's not particularly interesting. Or you can report on endpoints. And you can also invert this model if you want to understand what endpoints, like say this endpoint has this finding on it that was part of this test that was in this engagement in this product that's part of this product type. So I can kind of walk down or up the model depending on what makes sense. And then some other cool features of DefectDojo that make your life better. We maintain, we are the one single source of truth, and we maintain that information inside of DefectDojo, but we integrate with where developers like to play, which is generally speaking Jira. So you can have, if you set up the webhook and the Jira integration, you can have bi-directional syncing with Jira. So as a security person, I can take a bug or a collection of issues or findings in DefectDojo and push them into issues in Jira. If, say, a developer closes that, it closes on the Dojo side. If a developer adds a comment in Jira, that shows up as a note on the DefectDojo side. But it allows the sort of two different teams to play in the universes that they like. Presumably your security people like DefectDojo, and the developers are already working in Jira anyway, so why make them have to sort of log into another console? Let's just push the actionable findings over to Jira and let the developers do their thing. And at the end of this, what you get is what I like to call the DevSecOps pipeline. I ran with the AppSec pipeline project at OWASP. This is what we were doing many years ago, and now it's become kind of a thing. But the idea here is you have intake. So I have some number of tools running. This is usually these days security orchestration, like CI/CD, you have a GitHub Action, you have a runner in GitLab, something that produces findings. This can also be a manual test. This could be whatever, but you have an action that happens that causes you to run any number of tools, right? These could be manually run, these could be run by automation, this could be scheduled. But at the end of the day, after these tools run, they go into a single source of truth, which is DefectDojo. And then from there, they get normalized. So I don't have to figure out how to get my burp suite findings into Jira and my SEMGRUP findings into Jira. I just have to connect Dojo to Jira, and that happens, right? So you've changed a problem of n number of tools to just a single integration, which is a huge win for security teams. And then if you have things like reporting and metrics, a lot of our customers and users will do things like push reports or metrics out of DefectDojo into things like Tableau or those kind of things. Or if you have GRC with something like Archer, you can push data into Archer. Obviously, I talked about Jira. And then I'll mention this a little bit later, but then if you're doing manual testing or needing to remove false positives, obviously you can do that directly in DefectDojo. And then one of the other interesting features that I'm surprisingly a lot of people don't catch when they first get into DefectDojo is this idea of comparing from scan to scan. So if you're scanning the same thing repeatedly, like I've got a CI/CD job that always looks at the same repo, you can do what's called a re-import in DefectDojo, and it'll basically take a diff of those two scans. So this allows you to not have to, not have to do the math that you used to have to do when you did these independently of, okay, last time I saw this time I didn't see it. Okay, if it was in the first one, but not in the second one, okay, cool, it's fixed. I can mark that one off. DefectDojo will automatically close those findings for you, which is fantastic. And you can walk back in history of these re-imports and see when things came, when they disappeared, when they were closed, really. And then when they also reappeared, like if you have a regression, that'll show up in the history. And so it allows you to reduce the number of findings to just those that are active via diff when you're doing repetitive scans, which is fantastic. And then deduplication is a huge part of DefectDojo. So you can suppress duplicates either at a global level or within an engagement. The idea being is that if you're running a tool over time, you will have the same results come in, particularly if the things don't get fixed. So how do I make those duplicates go away so I don't have to deal with the first? And that's what deduplication gets you within DefectDojo. There's a legacy system, or there are custom configured hash codes. Most of the tools have moved over to custom configured hash codes. I haven't counted recently, but we're moving in the right direction, and certainly any new tool has that. But it allows you to say, based on these fields, either within this scanner or across scanners, I want to dedupe any finding that matches that criteria. So now if I run something 4 times and I have the same issue 4 times, I'm only going to end up with 1, which is also critical because you don't want to tell the people, the teams that you're interacting with, the dev teams generally that you're acting with, hey, I want you to fix it, I want you to fix it, I want you to fix it, I want you to fix it. You should just send them 1, right? There's one thing for them to fix. And then false positives and false positive history is a configurable thing in DefectDojo you can turn on. You can think of it almost like duplication, where it matches on certain fields within a tool. the same tool, but if you mark something as a false positive and have false positive history turned on, DefectDojo will remember that and continue to mark those false positives going forward. And then DefectDojo also allows you to group findings. The way I usually see this used and the way I would recommend using this is to group findings by mitigation. So if a tool reports 4 or 5 different things, and your real ask of that product team is, hey, I need you to do this one fix, and these 5 things will be addressed, you can group those into what's called a finding group in DefectDojo and say, push that over to Jira as a single issue. Now you're not telling the team 5 times to do the same action, you're telling them 1 time to take 1 action. And that is certainly a much better way to interact and have a peaceful relationship with your brothers and sisters over in the dev team, right? And then additionally, you could also merge findings. There are some cases where that makes sense. Generally, I think grouping them by mitigation is the better solution, but we do also allow you to merge multiple findings into a single finding if that's better for you. And then finally, the final secret sauce of DefectDojo, I think, is the API. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody about DefectDojo last week when I was up in New York City, and they were like, oh, DefectDojo, yeah, you're API first. And I was like, well, I don't know if we were strictly that when we created it. We knew we needed to do automation, and I think our API was very focused on that automation. But DefectDojo has been out and around for almost 10 years now, if not 10 years. And so, yes, now we have a fully featured API. Pretty much anything you want to do within the UI, you can do within the API, which is fantastic. So if you know how to do a little bit of programming and pick your favorite language, Python, Ruby, C#, Go, I don't care what it is, Bash, right? You can now interact in a programmatic way with DefectDojo and get things done even quicker. This is how a lot of people do CI/CD jobs, have them submit to the API, right? You can run a job, gather those results, and then shoot those into the import or re-import endpoints. So what does the journey look like with DefectDojo? And honestly, now that we have a commercial entity behind it, what is it like for our customers? We see a broad range, and that's been really interesting to me because originally we built this to do kind of automation and deduplication and false positive management when I worked at Rackspace, just because we were so far behind the 8 ball in terms of people and the scope of work we had. But I've gotten to know, a whole bunch of different people running DefectDojo in a whole bunch of different situations, and there's a pretty broad range. We have some people that have no automation whatsoever. Maybe they've just started a security program. A lot of times somebody gets voluntold that they're going to be the AppSec person, and suddenly they're doing AppSec. I've had people ask me questions about Dojo at conferences that were in that very situation. So they probably have nothing. They have a green field, if not like bare earth to start with. And so DefectDojo will work in that situation. You can pull files out of any kind of tool that we support, the 177, and upload them into DefectDojo. You get deduplication, you get templates, you get reports, you get the whole 9, right? But as you grow over time, you'll suddenly start to do things like, hey, I want to combine some automatic reports. I want to do re-import. I want to have different types of engagements for different types of activities. Like maybe I have a quarterly engagement for a compliance regime, but I also am doing continuous scanning with this, say something like Sneak or some other SCA tool. You start to see more and more integration to where if you look at our customers, they range from 2% API traffic to 97% API traffic. So interestingly enough, and somewhat unintentional, quite honestly, when we first built this, DefectDojo can flex between someone who's just starting and someone who's very advanced, which is really cool. That's something I'm quite proud of as our little project has grown. And then I mentioned the AppSec pipeline project that Aaron Weaver and I started at OWASP. I'd like to cover this just to talk about the different stages, because whatever you're doing for a AppSec or product security program, you will inevitably have these stages. So the first one is intake, and this is work comes into your hits your radar, comes into your life. What does that look like? It could be, like I said, a compliance requirement that every quarter I do a thing. This could be a company policy thing that says every time we do a major release, we run these 7 tools. It could just be an event. I merged from a feature branch into master. Something happened though that inspires work on your team. And so that's where you go to triage. You look at that work and say, okay, here's what I'm presented with. How much effort is worthy of putting into this particular event or this intake of work? So I worked at a very large company one time. We basically broke things into three buckets or categories, where you got the first category was the high risk things. You got all of the tools we had plus manual testing. Middle category, medium risk things, you got all of the tools, and a little bit of hand holding in terms of triaging findings. The third tier, the low risk, you got tools, and honestly, we just took the output of those tools and handed them to you and said, good luck and God bless, because we just didn't have the bandwidth. But at least we had a highly optimized way to get work through our program and get better visibility. So whatever is the result of this triage, you're going to run some number of tools against that. That's at the test stage or position. Ideally, these are automated tests that you can just fire off at will. It's an easy button. Those will go into a vulnerability repository, aka DefectDojo. And like I said earlier, you could do false positive or manual manipulation of the data. You can push them off to defect trackers like Jira, GRC, and other tools. So
Hey,
this is the
Matt,
sort of,
excuse me.
yeah,
Sorry, we
yeah.
do have a raised hand and a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Rodell, I'm going to allow you to talk so that you can ask your question.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I could wait to the end. Mine was back at something else. I figured I'd wait to the end. So he finished. It was.
Oh,
Oh,
hit
okay.
me. You can hit me now. Try to stump me. I love it. Come on, let's go.
Oh no, it's not a stump. It was uh, back in the close. You say you can close the findings in Defect Dojo.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, do you have in your integrations you got like a bidirectional like communication synchronization between your tools, so that if you close it in Defect Dojo, it's going back and closing the other one. If it closes in the other, it closes in Defect Dojo. Is there a
Yeah,
relationship there?
yeah, that is true for our Jira integration. It's bi-directional. So if I open a finding and I push it to Jira, say from Defect Dojo,
Uh,
and a developer closes it on the Jira side, it'll close on the Dojo side.
I'm talking about the tool, so the
The
actual
tool
scanning
itself.
tool. Yeah.
So uh, right now that depends. It depends a lot on the tool. There are a handful of API integrations. Right now, those integrations read in data and there's not bi-directional. We've looked at doing bi-directional against tools. We don't have that yet. That would probably end up being a pro feature, to be honest with you, because it's super tricky as an open source project to, particularly with commercial tools, have tests in a repo that validate that those tools keep working, if you get what I'm saying.
I understand.
There's usually some license and money behind it, unfortunately, for the non-commercial tools. And if you are doing, that's a great point. Someone just dropped in the chat. If you are doing re-import, you can in essence get that same automatic closing of findings by just re-importing that same tool's output a second time into the same engagement, right? So let's say you run it once and you find 5 things and you close one of them in that tool. The next time you import into DefectDojo, if you're doing re-import, it will notice that that 5th one went away and auto close it. So you'll effectively get it closed on the Dojo side, but maybe not upstream. Does that help?
Yeah, familiar with the re-import. So, well, now for synchronization, then, so you wouldn't have to re-import it if they made the change in the tool. You get an automation in the flow. It changed on that side of the tool. It automatically gets updated in Defect Dojo, or I'm trying to figure out
Well, so yes and no, depending on your situation. So let me further explain. For Pro, we have these things called connectors that we're just now launching in beta. Those will allow you to connect to an API. Like we have Sneak right now, and some others. I'm forgetting them off the top of my head. So that those automatically poll on a daily basis the API endpoints of those security vendor tools. So in that same case, if I found 5 things, say in Sneak on day 1, and you go in and close one of those findings. So now there's only 4 on day 2. That connector will run and re-import that and auto close that. So in DefectDojo itself, it will be closed. Now upstream in Sneak, it will also be closed because you closed it, right? So does that help?
That helps. That makes sense. No, I've used it before. That's what I'm trying to figure out. And
Okay,
what
cool.
we can
Yeah.
get now. What we can get now. All right.
Yeah, sure. No worries. No, great question. And it gets tricky because of the different types of imports and talking to upstream systems. It does get complicated quickly. Absolutely. Awesome. Okay. So one of the other things that I think is crucial about having DefectDojo in line in this process is you have 2 places to get rid of false positives, which quite honestly are the bane of your existence. And that is that, well, when I used to be the product security manager at Rackspace, I used to say the quickest way to find my foot in your backside, if you were one of my employees, was to hand one of the product teams a false positive, right? Because now you've wasted time doing that work. You're wasting that product team's time proving you wrong, probably having a meeting, etc. Right? So but if you have an AppSec pipeline with DefectDojo in line, you have 2 places to get rid of those false positives. Ideally, you'd filter it upstream in the tool. Not all tools give you great knobs and dials to change how they output data, but that's okay because you have DefectDojo in line. You can do any sort of second filtering you need to inside of DefectDojo itself. Because having run a lot of different tools over time, security tools, the knobs and dials they give you to adjust the output of those tools and to squash false positives in the tools varies widely between tool vendors. So having this second place where I can catch those things before I pass them downstream to people like, the product security teams, or the product teams rather, is a huge benefit, right? You don't want to lose face with those teams because you only have so much goodwill. And I would prefer not to burn it early if possible. And so once again, here's your DevSecOps pipeline, that hopefully the endpoint of what you're working towards with DefectDojo. Then I'm going to talk about a particular case study we have where someone we know who used DefectDojo had, this is Pearson, when they first brought DefectDojo into their team, they were doing 44 assessments per year. By year 1, with DefectDojo and the startings of a AppSec pipeline, they were able to bump that 44 to 224. And then by year 2, they got that to 414, which is an 840% increase in the throughput of that team, right? So from a management perspective, suddenly the same size team is significantly more important. And honestly, they're seeing a heck of a lot more of the landscape of potential security issues within that company, just by bringing in DefectDojo and doing some automation tooling around it that DefectDojo lets you do. Bam, they have a much happier team, and they have a significantly better view of their landscape of security issues, which is a pretty cool thing. And then I like to think of this as like a second generation of an AppSec pipeline. This is sort of the next. If you look at how these have evolved, particularly for me, but also for other people I know who've done similar things, usually your first automations are around running existing tools on a normally kind of cadence. Like once a week we do a SAST, or every quarter we do a manual pen test, or some kind of normal cadence. As you grow in maturity, you'll realize that there's a lot of event-based things that happen. So this is usually almost all, but not always, but frequently around things like changes to code repos. So like I said, you have a feature branch that gets merged into master. I have a PR that gets merged. Some kind of event happens, right? I launch a new deployment of a product. I want to run infrastructure scans against it. Whatever it is, you have an event that happens. You have an AppSec pipeline that'll catch that. That pipeline knows how to run a bunch of tools at whatever the targets are. These could be repos, these could be infrastructure, this could be whatever, this could be a container registry, doesn't matter. Those tools are going to run and return results that get pushed into DefectDojo, and you have all of the benefits of dedupe, re-import, diffing, false positive management. All of that stuff happens for you. So now you can take an event, run through this process, and pop that into DefectDojo. I did this for a company I worked for. I look at LinkedIn if you want to see who I worked for. I guess I won't name them, but we did this across, it was 34 Python repos that we were scanning in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So this stuff can get silly fast if you build it correctly, and you can get crazy scale, because we went from a program that we initially thought was going to be, hey, let's try to do these regularly. We hadn't really defined what regularly was, to shoot, we can do these on every merge into the repos. Anytime something got merged into a mildly important branch, we ran a gauntlet of tools against it and pushed all those results to DefectDojo. So you may not be here today, but you can certainly get here, and DefectDojo will walk that whole path with you. I said it earlier, but I've been involved in OWASP forever and a day. For a while, I was an employee of OWASP Foundation, and we were looking at how to set up an AppSec pipeline using OWASP tools. And so this is another example of how to set one of those up, where you have like what I would call a weaponized Jenkins, or some kind of CI/CD tool of your choice, that will pull in project code, launch a bunch of containers against it, use things like Zap and a Docker to test, like, and there's also the secrets tools that OWASP has. There's a bunch of tools that OWASP have, but you can run those in a Docker, push those results into DefectDojo, and then do nice things like drop something into a Slack channel that says, hey, we just ran this tool against your code and found these things, or push them to Jira. Same idea, just a different way to do it with OWASP specific tooling. Well, here's another example of a AppSec pipeline that I'm familiar with, that somebody I know in the business, or somebody I know in the field, whatever, created. They were very much an Atlassian shop, where they had developers checking code into Stash. That fired off a webhook to an AppSec pipeline that ran a bunch of Dockerized tools against whatever that code base was, push those to DefectDojo. They actually dropped a summary of the results of that tool run into the Slack channel for that particular development team, and then also push those issues to Jira. In this specific case, they were testing 15 repos over 4 months. They had 5,100 runs of that pipeline with over 25,000 container executions. So once again, if you set this stuff up right, you can really turn scanning, which used to be a manual, somewhat painful process, into a literal easy button, right? And get some serious results out of this. Question, does DefectDojo help contextualize and prioritize vulnerability findings for multiple scanners? Yes, there's several ways it does that. We just added EPSS support into DefectDojo. So if you want to have an idea of exploitability, you can get that from EPSS. There's also CVSS v3 in DefectDojo if you want to do the extended parts of CVSS, the environment, and I'm forgetting the other ones. The ones beyond the base score that I'm forgetting the 2 names for. You can do that. We have a whole bunch of ways to munch findings, so you definitely can contextualize and prioritize. You can set criticality of products and then use that to base your decision on. I've seen that done many, many times, where a critical finding in a critical product is more important than a critical finding in a low criticality product, if you see what I'm saying. So definitely ways to do that in DefectDojo. Thank you for the question. That is awesome. Oh, and then hopefully I made you curious. If you are curious and you want to give DefectDojo a spin, we run a public demo any time of the day. You can log into demo.defectdojo.org. It's the open source version of our product, and you can log in and play around. Now, granted, one, I wouldn't put any real data there because anybody can log in. So, like, you've been warned. But two, every night we wipe all the data and do a reinstall. So it's fresh every day. But this is free. It's been open to the public. I've been running this thing for, I don't know how many years, many years on my own dime. So log in and play around. It is definitely there and working. And then obviously there's also DefectDojo Pro, which is the commercial offering on top of DefectDojo. We offer SaaS. You can, if you want to do the normal SaaS thing, you can log into DefectDojo. You can log into your cloud and fire up a cloud instance. We manage and host that for you. These are single tenant instances with no shared resources. There's a lot of teams that like this because if for no other reason, their management found that the teams are spending an inordinate amount of time just managing the platform. I mean, DefectDojo is pretty amazing, but it's gotten to be a fairly complicated platform to run. And if you're not particularly great at infrastructure, if you just want to do testing or your job is just to do testing, there's a slice of the population that likes to just not have that problem, and we're happy to host that for you. And quite honestly, we've got several engineers that work on DefectDojo full time, strictly paid for by the SaaS. So it's been a very virtuous cycle between our offering and the open source project. So we've been able to do a lot of work that probably wouldn't have happened, quite honestly, if we did not have it be our day job. Oh,
And Matt, we do have a question
yeah.
again from Rodell.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you were closing. I want a quick question. Because you guys support a lot of different tools, which is great. From the tools, some of the integrations get more like intricate, where they actually really get in and use like the custom ID finder for a flaw so deduplication is boom. It's the tool provides you the ID. Another scan comes in with it. You can easily duplicate it and say this is a duplicate. This is the same issue. For tools that uh, don't really have that, it kind of individually creating the product. Do you have some type of like integration or support for that deduplication mapping so that we can say, okay, this is the same thing as this one. Like it's not just this line number because the lines can change across the file, but to come up with our own ID and map it to that ID for the future.
Yep, that's a great question. And so just for more context for people that are newer to DefectDojo, in deduplication, we have these things called hashes that allow us to match duplicates. There are some vendor tools that are helpful that provide a unique ID that is unique for them. So I always pick on Qualys because that's the one I remember. But Qualys has a QID, which is a unique vulnerability identifier for that category of vulnerability from that tool. So if you see that twice in the same product in DefectDojo's case, it's really easy to say this is a dupe. Some tools don't provide that though. And this is what you're asking about. That is an interesting situation. So some of this is based on the tool and what you're testing. Some of this is based on just best practice. We try to put the best, our defaults are set up to be the best we can get out of that tool based on no real context of where they're running. But if you're running the open source version of DefectDojo in settings.py, there are places where you can adjust these. If you're running Pro, we do have a UI for this, so you can do that in the UI. And then if you're a supported customer of ours, we've helped a lot of our customers with that because, like you can kind of tell from this brief explanation, this can get rather complicated because depending on the context of how you're running the tool and what you're running it against, like person one could have different settings for that hash code than person two because they happen to be a Java shop and they're running, I don't know, Figure SCA tool, and a different customer may be running that same SCA tool, but on Ruby, let's say. And because of how those report those issues, the actual way that you dedupe them optimally could be different. So it is tricky, to be real honest with you. And what I would suggest if you were facing this today is do some experiments. I like to create like my own product type, a fake product type, and put a fake product in it and then import results in there because you can delete all that and get rid of it when you're done with the experiment. But do that and iterate a few times to find what works best for your context. Because unfortunately, DefectDojo is stuck with what the tools give us, and some tools are better than others.
Yeah,
Help?
and the reason that very I agree. Because I know some of the tools we have, I think initially going, they have that, so we wouldn't need even the deduplication in DefectDojo. But another one's coming up. It's kind of everything is putting out is like its own separate instance, and so we need to group things together. And some of the findings, like if there's multiple on the same line, like you
Yep.
guys didn't have that capabilities in some of your options to actually say, oh, these are duplicate, to say this is not a duplicate, it's a unique instance. And if you can duplicate it, they can fix one and then all of a sudden it'd be gone when, it's, you don't want to duplicate it because it'll show up again because it's two things on that line.
Yeah, we spend a
Right.
lot of time with our customers tweaking those because you're right, that can be super intricate. And like you said too, it really depends on the tool and the body, in your case, the body of code that you're testing. Because
Yeah.
you could point that at a different repo and have different results, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay,
Great
thank
question.
you. I have another question for you, Matt. How is this considered ASPM?
Um, oh my. So my understanding of application security posture management, right, is it is a tool that allows you to read in from multiple sources and get an idea of the posture of your application security portfolio. And to be quite honest, before ASPM was a term 10 years ago, that's why we built DefectDojo. That's why I kind of giggled a bit about the ASPM term, um, because we were doing this before it was a thing. So I mean, I don't know how Dojo isn't an ASPM tool, to be honest with you. We can take in results programmatically or automatically. We can dedupe. We can give you a whole bunch of different views about that, the posture of your entire environment, which is Defect Dojo globally, a subset of it, which could be, let's say, a business unit that would have mapped to a product type in Defect Dojo, a specific product, a specific engagement. So we can slice and dice and filter the data in tons of different ways, which is what I think you want to get out of an ASPM to begin with. And then with the API and the other API integrations we have, we can pull in data from numerous sources, over 177 different sources, and normalize it for you. So, I mean, to me, that just sounds like the definition of an ASPM, to be real honest with you.
All right, great, thanks, Matt. We have another question and also a hand up. The question is, my understanding is that Defect Dojo is app vuln focused. How does Defect Dojo tie into the greater enterprise vulnerability management program beyond AppSec vulns? For
Oh, I love
example, can
this.
it integrate with other vuln management tools that track other non-app specific vulns?
Oh, I love this. Yes. Oh, this is a great question, and you're keeping me honest, so I love it even more. Um, no, this is super, and I kind of forget that because I spent so much of my time. I'm a developer at heart, so at the end of the day, I like writing code and breaking it. Um, but when we first created Defect Dojo and I ran the product security team at Rackspace, we owned everything, which was infrastructure up. So Defect Dojo natively from day one handled both more traditional infrastructure type of scanning as well as the AppSec specific things. And then at the end of the day, Defect Dojo, a finding is a finding. A finding just means there's something not right in the world with the security of this thing, right? I've had several customers come to us and say, hey, we do there was one customer who came to us and said, we do what they called, I'm trying to remember what they named this thing. I'm going to give it a name. I may not be quoting this accurately, but we're going to do a controls review, a manual controls review, where they literally had a list of security controls that they expected to be in whatever they were reviewing. And they would literally go down this list and say, has it, doesn't have it, whatever. They wanted to track that in Defect Dojo. You can do that, right? It's just a finding, right? A finding is this product doesn't have this control. And because we'll accept manual findings and we have generic importers for CSV or JSON, it's easy to put that stuff into Defect Dojo. I've had other teams use it for threat modeling, where you do a threat model and the output of the threat model is these weaknesses. Those can go into Defect Dojo and you can track them. You can also upload a PDF and attach it at the product or the engagement level as well if you want to sort of track the output of a threat model, if your output is a PDF, diagram kind of thing. So definitely it'll cover the full spectrum. At the end of the day, Dojo is both great and terrible because it's so flexible. Like Dojo by design doesn't tell you how to run your AppSec program. Like for example, we have a friend I know who does embedded systems. So they actually field embedded devices in businesses, and they wanted to track those and the vulnerabilities with them. But because of how that works, they have very specific version numbers that get fielded. So they know that business one has version 1 and business 3 has version 2. And they wanted to be able to track the vulnerabilities by version number. So they created a product type called their embedded device, and they have a product for each version that's fielded of that device. And then they can track the vulnerabilities for a specific fielded version of that embedded device. Like that's the flexibility with DefectDojo. Because at the end of the day, Dojo just wants to take in your data, sort it in a way that makes sense for how you do business, and then provide you results. So, oh, that's an awesome question. I almost didn't say that, so thank you for keeping me honest.
All right, thank you, Matt. And I will, we have a raised hand that I will get to and let you speak in 1 second, Alban. I'll just, on a follow up on the ASPN, we have the comment, ASPM is a marketing thing, I feel. And as the marketer on the call, I will say you're not incorrect, but it's a term, I think, that gets, terms evolve over time and people call the same thing different things over time. And Greg Anderson, who's actually our other co-founder, has a blog on this very topic coming out this week. So I would say check your socials or a blog to read more on his opinion on security buzzwords like ASPM. And then I will turn it over. I'll let you talk, Alban, to ask your question. Okay, Alban, you have permission to talk. You need to unmute yourself, and then we can hear you if you still want to ask it.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. No worries.
My question was regarding more DefectDojo in a long-term point of view when you have a production environment. Engagements are always focused on time-based. They are short moments in times, which doesn't really fit, which we don't really know how to fit into when we have more images and vulnerabilities that comes over time. And we would like to scan, for example, our Kubernetes clusters and so on from a more of a long-term point of view where we should see, are there any new vulnerabilities that pops up? How can DefectDojo solve this potentially? Is there a way to create long-term engagements maybe?
Ah, yes. Oh, that's another great question. And so you are seeing a vestige of the initial way that DefectDojo was created. Because when we first created Dojo, wind back 10 years in history, we were very engagement focused. And you're right, it was point in time testing when we were at Rackspace. However, as Dojo has evolved over the years, although there are open and close dates of engagements, you don't have to close an engagement, right? Dojo is perfectly fine if you leave an engagement in progress for 3 years and keep doing reimports into that same engagement. So for your case where you're wanting to look over time, I think a really great way, a strategy to do that is to create an engagement that represents that unit of testing. Keep doing reimports into that. You'll get the diffing nicely for you to not have to, keep track of what opened and closed when. You'll have the history. And then we had a customer who was in this very same situation, and they asked us, how do I do this? We gave them that suggestion, and they said, well, but the auditors want us to have sort of strike points. Like at the end of Q1, I want to have a snapshot of what happened. DefectDojo allows you to create a copy of an existing engagement. So what they ended up doing, what we ended up working out with them was, at the end of the quarter, they would take that ever-living engagement they were re-importing into, make a copy of it, freeze it as the Q1 cumulative results for that quarter, and then keep re-importing into that ever-running engagement. And so if you can even strike a balance, in this case, they needed both. They wanted a continually running, never-ending engagement, but they wanted to be able to say, hey, auditor, here's what the world looked like in the end of Q1. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, no, great question.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes left, so I just want to make sure everyone gets their questions in, or if you have anything, to wrap up, that'd be great, Matt. Thanks.
Yeah. Yep. So just the key takeaways right quick. I don't I think it should be DefectDojo. That should be no surprise, but you really do need a single source of truth if you're running any kind of security program. There's way too many tools, way too many web things to log into. It's just too painful if you don't have it. One of the interesting outgrowths of us creating DefectDojo was, and this is very selfish from the security practitioner point of view, but you can change tools and it doesn't change your process, right? If your process is get tool, put it into DefectDojo, push it to the downstream stakeholders, you can swap out that tool anytime and nothing changes in your process, which is hugely freeing, shall I say. And like I said to my product teams or my product security engineers at Rackspace, like findings have to be actionable before you pass them on. You don't have in a lot of cases, you don't have a lot of credibility with dev teams. And if you want to get booted out of CI/CD or not invited to meetings anymore, like pass false positives downstream to them. So just don't do that. If you're running a team and you want to get the most out of what is inevitably a limited staff, something like DefectDojo is hugely valuable. DefectDojo was made to get rid of the boring, mundane drudgery that is inevitable when you're managing like vulnerabilities at scale. And Dojo does it for you. It will remember and dedupe for you. It's a fantastic tool for that. So it allows you to increase coverage and visibility and get a lot more scope of what you can keep your eye on as a security team, which is huge. And when you're doing this, you really want to focus on remediation efforts, because at the end of the day, like the whole reason I got into AppSec was I wanted to be put out of a job because I didn't want to find things that were broken anymore. And then API, obviously, if you know how to do that, that's a great thing. And then very quickly, I'm a Shakespeare person. I'm kind of a Shakespeare buff. I've watched a whole bunch of Shakespeare. I even went to London and went to the Globe, which was super cool. And saw Hamlet there, which was even cooler. Just dumb luck that Hamlet happened to be playing when I was there. But I love this quote. I have not come to praise Caesar, but to bury him. If you remember this famous speech in Shakespeare, I want to put a little twist on it. I want to say, I've not come to praise traditional AppSec. I've come to bury it. And I really want to see DefectDojo bury the sort of old bad days of one-off custom drudgery, spreadsheety kind of life for AppSec people. And that's it.
Great, and we are at the top of the hour. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We will get a follow-up email with the recording and the presentation. And if you have 2 seconds, I would love for you to take this quick poll just so we can make these sessions productive for you in the future. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Can I ask
Thank you for the awesome questions.
Okay, one question?
Yeah, I know in one of the previous versions, there were a couple of I want to say like little GUI things you could create for some stuff. Has that capability been extended in like the 2.0 version where you can get more set up some like data presentations and things where people can look in and see, oh, these are the findings, these are engagements, these are the flaws, these are things where you can like more like nail it down to certain areas, make more selections. So the little pages where you have the screens and the screenshots and
So you're talking about like metrics in general and presentation and visibility of the data that's in DefectDojo?
yeah, it wasn't real in the old version, for like version 1, like so older. You guys made it 2 and stuff later. It wasn't that
yeah, 2 has significantly better metrics just in general, and we're looking at increasing metrics over time. I know we've added a bunch of metrics in 2, even just of late. I'm trying to think. The last big change was that we had a overtime graph in the products page metrics in February-ish. I can't remember when that landed. So yeah, if you're not on a very recent version, I'd highly recommend you get to the most recent version, because the metrics have gotten much better. Even just the filtering of them has gotten much better.
Right.